My name is Dr. Eliza Hartley. For nearly a decade, I was the lead food sustainability researcher at Viridian Labs, one of the fastest-growing biotech companies in the Southwest. I had a corner office, a team of 10 under me, and a project that could reshape agriculture in drought-ridden regions, until the day everything was ripped away in under 5 minutes. The quarterly all-hands meeting had just started. Over 100 people packed the auditorium, and the air buzzed with nervous energy as leadership prepared to announce our new government contract. I'd helped write the proposal, spent months perfecting the formula, and I was excited to hear the news officially. Then the door slammed open so hard, it rattled the lighting fixtures. Margot Reynolds, our CEO, stormed in like a thundercloud in heels. She held a stack of papers, her expression wild. Her heels clicked like gunshots as she crossed the floor and stopped right in front of me. "Stand up," she snapped. Confused, I rose slowly. She shoved the paper toward me, one manicured finger tapping an email header. "Is this your address?" "Yes. Did you send this?" The paper trembled slightly in her grip, but her voice didn't. An email with confidential research attachments. A document that held the formulation we had just sold for $60 million. She said I sent it to a competing firm. My heart stopped. I hadn't. I opened my mouth to explain, but she kept going louder now. Corporate espionage, breach of trust, grounds for immediate termination. All I could do was stand there frozen. No one in the room moved. I looked out at my team, the same people who celebrated our successful field trials last month. They didn't meet my eyes. Some shifted in their seats. Others leaned away. I didn't understand how this was happening. I hadn't sent anything. But Margot waved the email like it was a confession, and I had no words to fight it. Security was already at the door. 2 men I'd passed every day with a smile now stood stiff, waiting for the signal. 7 years of work gone in seconds. Margot didn't just fire me, she did it in front of everyone. She said I'd never work in the industry again, that I had destroyed everything we built. Her words cut like razors. I could feel my chest tightening, my vision narrowing, but I didn't let the tears fall. Not yet. When they escorted me out, I didn't even get to speak. No chance to explain, no time to call legal. I just walked hands, shaking mind blank. I remember someone whispering behind me. "Eliza, I thought she was loyal." Someone else muttered, "That's why you never get too close to power." The elevator ride down felt endless. At my desk, the guard handed me a cardboard box. 5 minutes. I packed what little I had left. A framed photo of my sister and me at our first harvest festival. A ceramic mug that used to belong to my dad. Notes, journals, and lab logs I wasn't even sure I had the right to keep. It all felt like ashes. My fingers trembled as I zipped up my bag. Just before I left Wyatt, my research assistant appeared beside me. His voice was tight, nearly a whisper. "I can't believe you did this." "I didn't. I told him." He shook his head. "Everyone saw the proof," he said, then stepped back like I was radioactive. That was what hurt most. Not the job, not the salary. It was losing the people who once believed in me. The hallway felt colder on the way out. I walked past the lab I'd built from scratch, the conference room where I'd led our first pitch to investors. Every corner held memories. Every face turned away. No one stood up. No one said goodbye. I wasn't just fired. I was erased. Outside, the air was sharp with spring wind. I stood in the parking lot staring at the building that had been my world for so long. My phone buzzed. Email access revoked. Direct deposit canceled. Company issued laptop locked. Everything was gone before I could even start the car. I sat there, engine off, trying to breathe. My thoughts raced in every direction. Had someone framed me? Was it a setup? The timing was too perfect. The contract had just been signed. Someone had something to hide. But no one would listen now. I was guilty by default. I watched the glass doors one last time. No one came after me. No one called my name. I was no longer Dr. Eliza Hartley, the scientist. I was just another liability they needed to silence. But deep inside, past the shock and pain, something stirred. I knew this wasn't the end. Not if I could prove the truth. And I would, even if it meant tearing everything down to do it. I left the city with everything I owned in the backseat of my car. My savings were nearly gone, and my name had become poison in every inbox I sent a resume to. The scandal spread faster than I could react, and no one wanted to touch a researcher branded with corporate betrayal. My younger sister Claire lived in a small town just outside Fort Collins. She had a guest room and a kind heart, and that was more than I could ask for. She didn't ask many questions, just helped me carry my boxes up the stairs and said she was glad I was safe. For the first few weeks, I barely left the house. I scrolled job boards, endlessly refreshed my inbox like it owed me something. Silence. Applications were either ignored or met with generic rejections. Some didn't even bother with a reply. When I followed up, one company told me directly that they couldn't risk the optics of hiring me. Eventually, I started working at a cafe near the college. Claire had a friend who managed the place and needed weekend help. It wasn't science, but it was something. I took orders, brewed coffee, and wiped down tables. Customers smiled without knowing who I used to be. There was a strange comfort in anonymity, but it didn't last long. Every time I handed someone a latte, I felt like I was handing away pieces of a life I'd spent years building. The woman who used to manage federal contracts and lead lab trials was now refilling cream dispensers and folding napkins. At night, I lie in bed staring at the ceiling, wondering how quickly a life could collapse. Claire tried to cheer me up. She made dinner, asked about my day, and left funny notes in my lunch bag. I appreciated the effort, but there was a gap inside me that even kindness couldn't fill. I had lost more than a job. I had lost my identity, my purpose, the sense that I was doing something that mattered. One night, when sleep wouldn't come, I wandered into the garage. Our dad had passed away 3 years ago, and we hadn't touched most of his things since. Dust covered everything. Tools boxes, stacks of notebooks with yellowing edges. I opened one out of habit and froze. Inside was a sketch of a diagram I hadn't seen in over a decade. The nutrient cycle we used to work on together when I was in grad school. A natural soil enrichment system that mimicked forest decay using fermented root extracts. We never took it anywhere. It was just a father-daughter experiment born from too many long evenings and too much curiosity. I flipped through more pages. Formulas, failed tests, revised ratios. His handwriting mixed with mine. I remembered those nights. He believed we could make something simple that might actually help small farmers, like the ones he grew up with. I had shelved that idea when I joined Viridian, thinking it too naive for commercial development. But now, sitting in a dusty garage in borrowed sweatpants with nothing left to prove to anyone, it didn't seem so naive. It felt real, tangible, like something I could hold on to. I gathered the notebooks in my arms and brought them inside. At the kitchen table under the yellow glow of the overhead light, I began reading through every page. I hadn't looked at this material in over 10 years, but it came back like muscle memory. The math, the science, the why behind it. This was the first moment in weeks when I didn't feel completely lost. It wasn't a plan yet. It wasn't revenge, but it was something. A reminder that my knowledge didn't disappear just because someone erased my name from a company directory. I was still a scientist. I still had something to offer. And maybe, just maybe, this old idea was where I'd start to build my way back. A few days after rediscovering the old formula, I worked up the courage to ask Marcus, the cafe owner, if I could use the patch of dirt behind the building. It was a weedy, uneven strip of ground next to the dumpsters, but it got full morning sun and had decent drainage. He raised an eyebrow when I asked, but shrugged and said, "Sure, as long as I didn't mind hauling my own water." That evening, I knelt in the soil with a spade and a small bucket of compost. The light was soft, and the air still carried a chill from spring nights. I planted 2 rows of lettuce and a handful of green beans, adding a diluted version of the bionutrient my dad and I had once obsessed over. It felt strange bringing something so personal into such an ordinary place, but also quietly right. Every morning before my shift, I checked the soil-recorded pH, moisture, and light levels in a worn notebook. I logged temperatures, sketched root systems, and documented leaf development. No one noticed me back there except a stray cat that started sleeping near the planter box. In a way, it was perfect. No eyes, no noise, just me and the plants. By the third week, I could see the difference. The lettuce was deeper green with firm, upright leaves that shimmered with morning dew. The beans had climbed faster than expected, their tendrils coiling around the trellis like they knew what they were doing. I tested the soil around them and found higher microbial activity than in the control patch. The formula was working. Something settled in me as I watched those plants grow. It was the kind of quiet satisfaction I hadn't felt in a long time. No one was grading this. No press release was waiting. Just results. Real, living, replicable results. But as the data grew more consistent, so did a nagging thought. If this really worked, and I was starting to believe it did, then planting behind a cafe wasn't enough. This formula had potential far beyond backyard trials. It wasn't just about proving I could still do science. It was about what this formula could mean if used correctly. Better soil health, reduced water use, real help for struggling farmers. But I also knew something else. No one in power would believe a disgraced scientist with no lab and no funding, not unless I gave them a reason to look closer, which meant I needed to start thinking beyond the garden. I needed a plan. And if I was going to make anyone listen, I had to be smart. Very smart. It started with a text from someone I never expected to hear from again. Wyatt. Just 4 words. Contract signing next week. They're confident. I stared at the screen, heart thudding. That meant Viridian had passed inspection. The modified formula, the one with synthetic shortcuts, was about to go national. I didn't have much time. Everything they'd built, every lie they'd covered with glossy PR was about to be locked into a multi-million-dollar government deal. And I was the only person who could stop it. Not by shouting, not by begging to be heard, but with something far quieter and far more precise. Months ago, on the day I was fired, I had felt powerless. But in the chaos of clearing out my desk, I'd made a choice. The samples set aside for government testing, the ones used for initial verification, were not the same ones Margot thought they were. I had swapped them. Not just with a clean version of the formula, but with a signature, an organic marker compound I had designed to reveal the fraud under extended inspection. The marker was harmless under standard testing, invisible unless you knew exactly what to look for, but under specific conditions, heat exposure and slow-reacting reagents, it crystallized into a distinct pattern. Something that couldn't be explained away. Something that would prove the production formula had been altered after approval. That night, I returned to the garage and pulled out the sealed USB drive I had hidden months earlier. On it were all the notes, the chemical behavior of the marker, a full analysis of how to trigger the reaction, and most importantly, how it contrasted with the actual production batches. I created a new identity email, encrypted every file twice, and wrote a short but direct cover message. Then I sent it. Not to journalists, not to my old coworkers, but straight to the Department of Agricultural Oversight. I addressed it to a lead compliance officer I'd once met at a symposium, hoping she still remembered me. I said only that I was a former developer with evidence of discrepancy and included the chemical procedure. No accusations, no dramatic claims, just data. The message was sent with a soft ping, but the weight behind it was massive. I sat still for a long time after. My fingers still hovered over the keyboard, unsure if I should have done more or less. But this wasn't about vengeance. It was about truth. And if they ran the test properly, they would see it. The irony wasn't lost on me. They thought they destroyed me the day they forced me out. What they didn't know was that the evidence had already been planted quietly, scientifically, precisely. My defense didn't come in headlines or lawsuits. It came through a molecule I designed in silence, waiting for the right moment to speak louder than I ever could. It started with a headline: Biostimulant Contract, Suspended Pending Investigation. I stared at the screen, barely breathing. The government had halted the deal. Something in that marker I designed had worked. I refreshed the page again just to be sure it wasn't some glitch. But it was real, and it was only the beginning. By the next day, Viridian Labs was all over the news. Inspectors in hazard suits entered the facility. Local reporters filmed from outside the gates. Former employees started leaking anonymous statements about internal pressure and formula inconsistencies. The stock dropped 12% in hours. Executives went quiet. Then came the subpoenas. I didn't say a word to anyone. I waited. Let the storm keep building. 3 days later, I got a call from a woman named Leona Hayes at the Department of Agricultural Oversight. She asked if I was available for a consultation. Her tone was formal, but I could hear curiosity underneath. I agreed and met with the agency's technical team the next afternoon. The interview lasted 5 hours. I walked them through the original formula, explained how the marker worked, and pointed out where the production process had been manipulated. They listened carefully, took notes, asked precise questions. No one accused me of anything. No one doubted my answers. For the first time in months, I felt like a scientist again. 2 days later, Viridian's board reached out. They wanted to meet in person. No lawyers, no PR reps, just the directors and me. I said I'd consider it, but I made a list first. I didn't want a job. I didn't want an apology. I wanted power. If they wanted my help saving the company, they would have to give me the authority to rebuild it properly. The meeting was held in the same conference room where I had once been called a traitor. Now the board sat across from me, pale and quiet. Margot wasn't there. Word had already spread that she was under criminal investigation for falsifying regulatory filings. The board claimed they didn't know. I didn't believe them. But I didn't need confessions. I needed leverage. I laid out my terms. I would return only if I had complete control over research and development. I wanted 25% ownership, a seat on the board, and a profit-sharing program that funneled a portion of earnings into sustainability grants for small farmers. Silence followed. One director scoffed. Another looked like he might faint. Then the chairman spoke. He said they had no other option. The science community trusted me now. Investors saw my name as the only thread of credibility left. Without me, they had nothing to rebuild with. So they agreed. Not out of goodwill, but because desperation has a way of making people honest. I left that meeting with more than a new title. I left with my dignity intact. I had been cast out and labeled a threat. Now I was their only hope. But I didn't come back to help them. I came back to replace them. To turn a company built on shortcuts into something that could actually serve people and the planet. They thought they could use me. But I was done playing small. This time, I was calling every shot. 6 months after that boardroom negotiation, the company had a new name, a new mission, and a new foundation built on truth. We called it Renewal AgTech. Not just because the old name was tainted, but because what we were doing was different at every level. We weren't chasing profit margins. We were rebuilding trust between science and the land between industry and the people who feed us. The formula we launched with was the one I developed quietly behind the cafe. It was entirely organic, field tested, and met every regulation without a single corner cut. It performed better than expected, even in dry zones, and we had data to prove it. What mattered more to me, though, was who we served. We designed our first rollout not for industrial farms, but for the smaller growers who couldn't afford to fail another season. The Small Farm Equity Program became the heart of the new company. For every major contract we signed, a portion went to subsidies and education grants for family-owned farms. We created soil health workshops, mentorships, and regional demonstration plots. I didn't want to just sell a product. I wanted to share what I'd learned in the hardest chapter of my life, that resilience grows from the ground up. Some days, I still felt the weight of what happened. There were moments when I'd catch myself waiting for someone to doubt me, to accuse, to take everything away again. But then, I'd walk a field, see rows of healthy plants where dust used to blow, and that feeling would soften. The work was healing me in ways no apology ever could. Wyatt rejoined the team after Margot's sentencing. He looked older, more cautious, but honest. We didn't talk much about the past. We didn't need to. He threw himself into field testing quietly, making sure our results stayed bulletproof. Trust took time, but it was growing again, like everything else around us. On a late autumn morning, I stood at one of our pilot farms in Nebraska. The air was crisp, the fields golden with cover crops, and kids from the local school were visiting on a field trip. I watched one little girl kneel in the soil beside her father and press a small seed into the ground. Her hands were careful, intentional, like she already knew it mattered. He crouched beside her, explaining how the microbes in the soil helped the roots grow strong. I didn't know if he'd read one of our flyers or just figured it out on his own, but it didn't matter. They were learning together, passing something forward. I stayed quiet, hands in my jacket pockets, letting the wind move through the corn stubble. That image, the child, the seed, the soil, was everything I had fought for. Not revenge, not redemption, but restoration. There was a time when I thought I had to burn the system down to make it right. I don't believe that anymore. What I've learned is that the most powerful kind of justice isn't found in tearing down what others built. It's in proving that you can build something better. I had been erased once, but I came back not as someone else's employee, but as the architect of something new. And that, more than any headline or lawsuit or title, was what mattered most.